Musashi... Which one was part one again? Oh. 5 minutes. The moment those words left his mouth, Atoy Musashi turned on his heel and fled, thrusters blazing from his back and propelling him down towards the city. His body was still battered, but it seemed he'd managed to muster up some measure of resolve within himself. He was the kind of man who wouldn't give up until you killed him then. That was fine. Mereloco had no problem killing him. Still, there were concerns. The syringe Musashi had injected him with, for one. He could feel his strength and stamina, surging. But he sincerely doubted that Atoy Musashi would have gone to such lengths to boost his opponent's power. In 5 minutes, there would no doubt be some kind of side effect, one that Musashi believed would win him the fight. In that case, it was just as Musashi had said. Mereloco would have to end this before 5 minutes passed. Unchained! After using Unthroned for that brief moment, the untoward that Mereloco had used on the arena had lost so much of its potency. More and more of the structure crumbled out of the sky each moment, and the process of destruction was inevitable now. Sorry. In that case, he'd just make use of the remains. Unchained crushed the remnants into a more firm structure beneath Mereloco's feet, around the size of a truck, and he reached out, gripping 2 stray wires like the reins of a chariot. The whole construct blazed with purple aether. Atoy Musashi wasn't the only one who could conquer the sky, after all. Unchained, like a bullet, Mereloco's steed was launched right towards the shrinking swordsman. I'm a mite confused. Is he literally driving, like, Brubble? With his gravity? 200 years ago, Noah Laith was all but fallen. Did I pronounce that right? Noah Laith was all but fallen. Mereloco watched, his expression impassive, as the defenses of the city collapsed beneath him. It had only been an hour since Daemon had begun his assault on the capital, and in that time they'd already reached the endgame of the invasion. This truly was a planet of weaklings. A nearby tower fell, looking like the battlement of a metal castle, and Mereloco's steed moved to avoid it. These creatures had long ago been crafted by the Gene Tyrants to aid in transporting their servants across the surface of Noah Laith, and they did their job well. The Wind Waver, with the appearance of a massive flying manta ray, rode the air currents that coursed across Noah Laith's surface, taking Mereloco with it. Sorry. His arms were crossed and his balance perfect as the Wind Waver took up a new position. So is it a living thing? Okay. Right now, Mereloco's job was simply to wait. Daemon had already proceeded into the base that the leader of the remaining insurgents, a peasant woman called the Hexpa, had been using. She's called the Hexpa? This would be over soon, with that woman becoming a mere spray of blood on the floor. He'd be surprised if it even took 10 more minutes. So he waited for the sight he already knew he would see. The troops below would take care of the rest. It was nearly 2 hours before Daemon emerged from the central spire of the castle with the Hexpa walking alongside him. Mereloco raised an eyebrow at the sight. Had the planet surrendered? That was surprising. Noah Laith was one of the border worlds, the long strip of unlined territories between the Supremacy and the UAP. They were too proud to submit to the Supremacy, and too proud to join the UAP. Mereloco couldn't imagine what Daemon had done to change the Hexpa's mind, but he knew it couldn't have been pretty. But, now that he looked, ooh, he typoed his own name. It's the Hexpatan. Talk about a new world order. Yeah. Alan Wake? Now that he looked at it's a big anglerfish. Oh, man. Now that he looked, the Hexpa looked unharmed. That in itself was bizarre. She was small and weak, thin, with pale hair and bleary red eyes. She looked like a stiff breeze would do her harm. What was her name? Zoe? How would she come out of there without so much as a bruise? Mereloco furrowed his brow in confusion. As if they'd sensed his confusion, Daemon and Zoe looked up as one, addressing the gathered warriors of the Supremacy watching from above on their wind wavers. His hand clasped with hers, Daemon called out, "The battle is over! There's to be no more bloodshed! The Hexpa and I..." Mereloco narrowed his eyes as the two below glanced at each other. They exchanged a nod. We ought to be wed. Huh? Whoa! Bro, are you crazy? Present day. 4 minutes. Pinpoint Unchained controlled the chariot that Mereloco had crafted, governing its flight through the streets of Azumha. Traffic swerved to avoid him as he pursued Atoy Musashi, more than one car scraping or slamming into a nearby building as a result. Mereloco paid them no mind. They should have had the strength to drive better. Right now, the entirety of his focus was on the distant white dot that was Atoy Musashi. Honestly, it should be a national holiday for the Dawn Contest. Your ass should not have to go to work. In case things like this happen. He pointed a steady... Yeah. He pointed a steady finger. Like, they should be rules like children should not be allowed out during the Dawn Contests. Yeah, for real. He pointed a steady finger... He pointed a steady finger in the full moon's direction. Unworthy! A volley of gravity bullets surged forth, but the very instant Mereloco fired them, Musashi began to zip and weave through the air, dodging the linear projectiles with mere centimeters to spare. It's spare, not scare, by the way. Mereloco clicked his tongue. It seemed Musashi's attention was deadlocked onto him, too. Mereloco considered the situation. What was the best move here? Right now, Musashi was faster, but he was still battling grievous injuries. This rush of adrenaline could only do so much for him. He'd slow down. But would he slow down enough within the next 4 minutes? Mereloco couldn't gamble on that. Unchained! As he split an incoming automatic truck in half, Mereloco weighed his options. How could he make Musashi stop sooner? How could he make the full moon turn around? There had to be a way. This was a fool ruled by sentiment. Yes, sentiment. Mereloco put a finger to his ear. Woman, he said to the one on the other end, which hospital is Morgan Noct staying in? 200 years ago. Oh no. Is he gonna threaten Morgan-chan? No, Morgan! Usually Mereloco would not have questioned Damon's decisions. It wasn't just that it wasn't Mereloco's place. In the past, he just never wanted to question them. The notion of it never interested him. But this absurdity, he couldn't just ignore it. Is this something she offered you? Mereloco asked, leaning against the wall, his arms crossed. In exchange for her life, she said she'd marry you. They were in Damon's private quarters on the Amun-Ra, the Supreme's flagship. Oh, wasn't always the Shisha? Amun-Ra. Through the windows, the surface of Noah Lathe could be seen, the planet that was meant to have been pulled into the supremacy. Now, apparently, it was to remain independent. Damon looked up at him from his throne. The trials of supremacy had visibly taken their toll over the last few months, heavy bags under his eyes and a pallor to his skin. Even his horns seemed to droop a little. As I said, he sighed, I spoke to Zoe about the present situation, and we agreed it wasn't sustainable. As partners, we can move together to a new future. A better future. Mereloco nodded slowly. So, where are we invading instead, then? A strange look passed over Damon's face, and when he spoke, he looked away. Mare, he said, slowly, do you ever feel like there's something wrong with this world? Mereloco frowned. Noah Lathe? No, Damon shook his head. The galaxy, the whole world, the shape of it, I guess. Like there's something so wrong about it, but I can't put it into words. It's not that the machine is broken, but the machine was wrong to begin with, right from the blueprints. Do you get what I mean? Mereloco considered the question for a good long while, scratching his cheek. This conversation in itself was unusual. Damon wouldn't normally consult Mereloco on decisions like this, or seek outside opinions. Damon was the one who made choices. He led, and Mereloco followed. Life was more comfortable that way. But if he really needed Mereloco's opinion for this, you want to change something? Mereloco finally replied. He shrugged. Then change it. Damon nodded, almost frantically, a broad grin spreading across his face. You're the Supreme, after all, Mereloco continued. You have that right. The grin vanished. No, Mereloco doesn't get it. Fascism's bad, actually. No! Present day, 3 minutes. Turknil Hospital! Mereloco roared at the top of his lungs, voice bolstered by Aether. Run if you want, Atoy Musashi! They both turned at the same time, Mereloco in the direction of the hospital and Musashi in the direction of Mereloco. The bait had worked. In an instant, Musashi blazed his thrusters like never before, rushing towards Mereloco at a speed beyond his maximum. Narrowing his eyes, Mereloco extended a flat hand in the direction of his incoming opponent. Sentiment. Every time. 200 years ago. If we don't do this carefully, Damon said, it'll mean civil war, or maybe even something worse. There's no telling how people will respond. Hang on. He was hunched over a holographic map of Supremacy territory, miniature planets and stars spread out before him. His face was locked in concentration, eyes flicking from one system to the next, as if some secret miracle existed there if only he could spot it. Even if that were true, he clearly wasn't finding anything. His hands tightened on the console. The woman with him, the former Ooh, he did it again. Hackony? Tanhacky? He doesn't even say New World Order anymore. He just changes the text. What happened to him? The waitress is crying. Yeah, it's just like the sound of like... I actually love that in anime where like there's all this talk and build up and finally the fighting's so raw that it's just the sound of like fists and shit. Yeah, and everyone's just like staring quietly. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. It goes hard every time. I could watch it 1,000 times. It would never get old. The woman with him, the former Hexpov Noah Lath, put a gentle hand on his forearm. You're respected by the warrior class, she said softly, her own red eyes looking down at the map as well. Some at least will follow you, even if they don't agree with what you're doing. But how many? Damon sighed. Enough to fight off the ones who don't agree? I think you've misspelled it more times than you've done it right. The Hexpa considered her words for a moment before speaking again. I don't think there's a perfect version of what we're doing here. No matter what we do, it'll be messy. The best we can hope for is eventual peace and joy. For all mankind. Hold on. This implies one of two things. One is that this motherfucker has the prince inside her. The other is that she made the prince? Tan, what is happening? Is Damon the prince? Is the prince their child? Tan, what do you mean? Keep reading! Damon took in a deep breath. I suppose you're right. We either do something, or things stay like this forever. The things I saw as a kid, they'll just keep happening. Again and again, forever. The shape of this world makes it inevitable. These guys sound like Jim Crack. You know what I mean? In a good way. Then that shape is what will break. They'd been talking for a while now. Enough for Mereloco to piece together exactly what they intended. His heart thumped in his chest like a dull bell. A new edict was to be declared by the Office of the Supreme. It was to give each and every system within the Supremacy the right to secede and declare their independence without challenge or retribution. Even the weakest could act without fear. As if that chaos wasn't bad enough, the Supremacy as a whole could take no action against their neighbors for at least 200 years. Wait a minute. Is that why the Supreme didn't do shit until recently? Oh, okay. As he stood outside the door, eavesdropping on this absurdity, Mereloco glared daggers into the wall before him. This would be the end of the Supremacy without a doubt. If this happened, the nation would crumble away into nothing, not by being defeated by a stronger enemy, as was proper, but by their leader giving up. Mereloco had never been one for the dogma of the Supremacy, but this was beyond the pale. Hello.
Hi.
If you thought it was strange that you...
Somehow was simply going insane. I just arrived. That's what he was talking to no one.
Yeah, sorry guys. It was my fault.
He forgot to take his normal pill.
Grit's teeth. Bear's fangs.
He's like Dream. No, he's not like Dream. He's nothing like Dream.
So if you saw... We're gonna continue.
Present day. Are you actually going insane?
2 minutes. Mereloco fought against an irritating fly. Atoy Musashi had clearly realized from their earlier bout that he couldn't hope to withstand another one of Mereloco's hits, and so he had switched tactics entirely. Rather than darting in and out for attacks as he'd done before, he was now staying just outside of Mereloco's range, far away enough that the full moon could dodge any attacks that were launched, but close enough that Mereloco couldn't turn to head to the hospital. It only made sense. If Mereloco's assumptions were correct, Musashi no longer needed to land any hits. In 2 minutes' time, whatever substance Mereloco had been injected with would begin to turn against him. In short, he needed to end this fight within 2 minutes. Under these circumstances, there was only one way to do that. Ordinarily, Mereloco wouldn't have been able to use this twice in one day. Musashi would surely regret giving him that strength. Mereloco reached out and seized the world. Unthroned! Popcorn.
200 years ago, Mereloco glared as the two of them marched down the aisle, hand in hand. Mereloco glared as the two of them exchanged vows of white noise. Mereloco glared as the two of them danced, smiled, laughed. Mereloco glared as, hours later, he silently stepped into Zoe's quarters. His ears twitched. Bells could still be heard in the distance. Soon enough, they would surely hold a new meaning.
Oh my god! What is with people in Aetheral Space fridging people's wives?
Mereloco quietly closed the door behind him. This guy went on TV trips once. Zoe looked up from the window. The pale woman had been staring out the landscape of Apal, the pale green field stretching out as far as the eye could see. This was the landscape Damon had given her for this farce of a wedding. It was far better than she deserved. The parasite had eaten its fill.
Is this his misogynistic origin story because his homie got married? That's why he's like, woman.
No, he already didn't know anyone's names.
Oh no. Mereloco name 100 women challenge in the video.
Name 100
live
people.
stream.
No. She said, a half-remembered grin on her face. What is it? Did Damon send you? Mereloco's eyes narrowed at the nickname. That and his lack of response seemed to clue Zoe in. Her own eyes widened just a fraction, and she carefully clasped her hands on her lap. In the distance, bells rung. Are you here to kill me? She asked. Yes. He took a step closer. There was little need for conversation here. He had no intention of changing his mind, and she surely understood that as well. This was not a difficult thing for him. It entailed the same level of effort as cleaning his boots. Still, the woman talked. Did the shepherdess send you? She asked. Mereloco furrowed his brow. Who? Zoe closed her eyes. So it wasn't Rory then? May I ask who did send you? The body? The tree? Nobody sent me, Mereloco snapped, a sliver of irritation entering his voice for the first time. I'm doing this because I want to. Sorry I've offended you somehow. Even now her voice was soft, bordering on apologetic. That just made Mereloco's blood boil more. One should not be so courteous to the murderer. You're in the way, Mereloco growled, looming over her. You're causing trouble, filling Damon's head with stupid shit. He smiled sadly. You found out. Damon worked for years to get where he is, Mereloco seethed. He's beaten down everything in his way, and he's being beaten down. He's given everything to become supreme, and you're going to make him throw it all away? No, I won't let you. Do you think he's happy? What? Do you think Damon is happy? Zoe repeated. Do you think becoming supreme made him happy? Has he ever seemed happy to you? Today. He doesn't need to be happy, Mereloco grunted. He's the strongest. Zoe spoke up with more fire than he expected from her. And what is that worth? You're the strongest, so what? It's meaningless. A crown you convinced yourself was worth it all. You took everything away from yourself to reach the top, and when you do, you realise not a second of it was worth anything. Mereloco sneered. Don't try to talk your way out of this woman. She looked up at him calmly, with the eyes of someone who knew what would happen next. You can't understand, can you? Her voice was full of strange sympathy. What? You don't get what I'm talking about. You can't. This world, the machine's ruined you. She smiled softly. Damon's told me a little of your story. I get it. There's no room inside you to think about the world, is there? It's been starved out of you. Keep talking and I will kill you. Zoe closed her eyes. I've already accepted you'll kill me. Mereloco raised an eyebrow. You won't try to run? There's no point, Zoe whispered. You want to hurt me and I don't want to hurt you. There's only one way this ends. Mereloco's eye twitched, as if this woman could ever hurt him, as if anyone could. As he took his final step forward, Zoe opened her eyes again, looking up at him, her red gaze resolute. Do you really think this will make Damon happy? He'll understand. Popcorn.
Mereloco's fist came down, Once, twice, 3 times, each time with the force of a sledgehammer, each time cracking bone and sending blood spraying onto the walls. He worked fast. The guards were already on their way. Just 3 hits, and the woman was already a broken mess on the ground. A hollow rattling filled the air. If the woman wasn't already dead, she soon would be. This was the extent of what her words had been capable of. Mereloco went to turn away, but then he saw it. His eyes widened, his mouth went dry, his fists unclenched, gore spilling out. He could see one of Zoe's hands where she'd fallen. And from this angle he could see her nails. He could see underneath her nails. He could see the sheathed claws she'd kept concealed until the very end, deadly sharp. He could see her killing engine. Imminent. Mereloco's legs began to shake, and soon enough they collapsed beneath him, sending him to his knees. This woman had been an iniment. This woman had been a killing machine. With the slightest scratch, with the barest effort, she could have ended his life. This world was survival of the fittest. Mereloco cared nothing for the dogma of the supremacy, but he had believed that, at least. And yet, here, the fittest had closed its eyes and accepted its end. Until the moment it had vanished, it had kept its claws sheathed. It didn't make any sense. There was more. An iniment was cursed with the instinct to kill, to mutilate, to slaughter. How much willpower must it have taken to go an entire lifetime without spilling blood? How much must it have taken, not even to defend oneself? There was strength there. There was strength there that Mereloco couldn't understand. He realized that tears were streaming down his face. He didn't know why. You don't get what I'm talking about. You can't. Yes, he had never cared about the dogma of the supremacy, had he? He admitted that freely, so why was he here? Why had he done this? It wasn't for the supremacy, or the honor of the Supreme, or any of that bullshit. Why had he killed this woman? She'd been turning his friend into someone else, and his friend was the only thing he had. That was it, jealousy. Everything else had been starved out of him. By the time the guards came, Mereloco was blind to the world. His fists covered in blood, he knelt down on the carpet, allowing himself to be taken. The body of the Supreme's bride was taken away as well. Rumor went that, while she was being treated fruitlessly, the bride had reached out and taken the arm of her doctor. Rumor went that a surge of aether had flowed through one arm and into another. Her body had crumbled into dust. Rumor went that the doctor fled the planet the same day. Is that the prince?
Yeah.
Is this the doctor who sent out the orders?
No,
because she's not supreme. But Mereloco had no time for rumors. He was confined, stewing in his own thoughts he did not understand. It took a long while before Damon came to see him. And the worst part, Damon did understand. I hope you wake in a kinder world than this. Present day, 1 minute. Mereloco held the void. There was no way that Unthroned was an actual black hole. The amount of power needed to create and control such a thing would be absurd. If Mereloco was capable of such a feat, he'd be on a level far beyond Supreme. So it wasn't an actual black hole, but it certainly looked the part. Mereloco's hand was gripped like a claw towards Musashi, flayed and bloody from the pressure, and floating before it was an orb of absence. It devoured everything. The automatics, the walls, the passing trucks, even light itself. Musashi was pushing against it with all the force his thrusters could generate, but even so he was slowly being dragged in. 30 seconds, but that was all right. He'd already made preparations. When he'd initially fled from Mereloco, he'd planted the pillars of Radiant Almighty in his path, and when Mereloco had forced him to return, he'd absorbed the energy they'd generated. He had Almighty ready to go. 15 seconds, but he had to wait for his moment. He'd been timing this situation carefully in his mind. If he fired off Radiant now, he had no doubt it would be devoured by this monstrosity, by Unthroned. He'd only get one shot at this. He had to make it count. 7 seconds! So at the very moment the 5 minutes were up, at the very instant the agony descended, he would fire. He'd end this battle with one blow. Right as Unthroned disappeared, Musashi would blast through the space it had occupied. 3 seconds! But 2 seconds! Toy Musashi, 1 second. Had not noticed. His plan had been doomed from the outset. No matter how vicious the pain inflicted by Golden, it didn't matter. To the man called Mereloco, it wouldn't even qualify as a mosquito bite. When his eyes had been burned, Mereloco had not flinched. When his hands had been charred, Mereloco had not flinched. When his foot had been mangled, Mereloco had not flinched. These were not the results of stoicism or willpower. This was something far more primal, far more esoteric, and far more insurmountable. This was something that would bring all of Atoy Musazi's plans to ruin. Mereloco's aether tick was pain nullification. 0. Radiant Almighty! The beam of light shot forth and was devoured by the darkness. Mereloco did not flinch.
Damn. My pain nullification technique. I haven't used it since the era.
I wish I hadn't made any dumb comments during that at the end there. That was really good. So is that how strong killing engines are? Like, she just had claws. Does that really mean
they're really poisonous?
Oh. Gene Tyrant venom?
Basically, yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's very similar to Gene Tyrant venom. It's basically guaranteed to kill you.
So the princess existed for at least more than 200 years.
Yes.
How much do we want to bet it was the first Aether ability? How much do we want to bet that it was Azez's Aether ability? What?
What?
You said yeah.
No, I didn't. I said no.
Oh.
This guy, theory, confirmation bias. His no. So his no, but his yes.
Whose was it then?
I'm not going to tell you.
Tell me, Mereloco.
The narrator will tell you when the time is right.
That'll be like 18 arcs!
When the time is right.
If
If it's not part of the, if it's not presented in the story, it's just trivia.
Downfallen. What happens if a Supreme is killed by an animal or an automatic?
It's treated the same as... Well, it would depend. If the automatic was, like, intelligent and self-aware, maybe they would make it Supreme. But generally, that would count as, like, an accidental death, and dawn contests would begin.
Has there ever been an Arcana automatic as a Supreme?
No, it has not.
One Emperor got killed by falling into his own pit. Oh, okay. Quaker asks, does the Final Church have a symbol associated with it? I know the UAP and Supremacy both have one, but I don't think it's ever been mentioned for the Final Church.
It would be sort of a set of 3 for the main Final Church, like 3 spheres, 3 dots, basically, in like a triangle formation. And then all different sects and groups and things like that. They'd all have their own individual shit.
Aww. Alright, well thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye!